Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July edition of the Southeast chapter of AAAE's Coffee Conversation, sponsored by the Corporate Committee. My name is Cody Parr. I'm with HDR. This month's Coffee Conversation is sponsored by HDR. And we've got a wonderful topic talking about ground transportation and the challenges that are coming with that as we emerge from the pandemic. I do want to have a few housekeeping notes. First, if you are not actively participating in the conversation, ask that you please mute or turn off your camera to conserve the bandwidth. But we absolutely do want you to participate. This is a coffee conversation. So while we do have some folks here to kind of lead the conversation, we're certainly looking for this to be more informal than an actual presentation. So we do appreciate you joining us and participating if you do feel like it. So with that said, I will turn things over to Tim Ward. And Tim, let's get going.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, Tim Ward, HDR. Thank you, Cody, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning to discuss ground transportation at airports. With the rapid increase of personal and leisure travel, we've seen a return to crowded airport terminals and curbs at peak travel times. And as we all know, the three-legged air travel industry, airlines, airports, and ground transportation all must work together, for an efficient function of that industry. While the airlines, TSA, airports are rapidly scaling up to handle this return, some aspects of ground transportation are certainly lagging in their abilities to do the same. So this session will discuss how some airports are addressing this issue, but also we want to lay the foundation to build a better, more efficient and customer-friendly service in the future. So we've set up a great panel for you all this morning, which includes Mr. Travis Crilly. Travis is the operations manager for Bluegrass Airport in Lexington. He's been there since 2010. Prior to that, he worked for Atlantic Aviation in Oklahoma City and University Park Airport in State College, Pennsylvania. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Geography from Penn State University and a Master's of Science in Aerospace Administration and Logistics from Southeastern Oklahoma State University. Travis is an accredited airport executive with the American Association of Airport Executives. We also have Mr. Terry DeLugos. Terry serves as the Director of Operations at the Jacksonville International Airport. He began his tenure there with Jacksonville in 2006 and has held various leadership positions with them over the last 14 years. Terry holds a bachelor's degree in aviation management from Jacksonville University and an MBA from the University of North Florida. Terry is also an accredited airport executive with AAAE and is also recognized as an international airport professional by ACI. Last but not least, we have Ray Mundy. He serves as the executive director for the Airport Ground Transportation Association, and he's done that since 1976. He is a professor emeritus at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and director emeritus from the Center of Transportation Studies at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Dr. Mundy has authored several books and numerous transportation articles during his business and academic career. With that, I'm going to kick things off with a question for this discussion, and this first one's really for Travis and Terry. So both of y'all, do you mind giving us a bit of background about your facilities and the types of ground transportation services offered at your airports?
Go ahead, Terry.
Oh, so kind. Thanks, Travis. So yeah, Jackson International Airport, medium hub airport. Pre-pandemic, we were averaging about 10,000 enplanements a day. So we have a pretty robust ground transportation setup. Every major brand for rent-a-cars, TNCs, of course, Uber and Lyft. With those guys, we have the exclusive taxi contract, prearranged limos, buses. Of course, we had buses going back and forth to the cruise terminal, which is not happening right now. But one of the interesting things about Jacksonville and our ground transportation setup, Jacksonville is the largest city land-wise in the United States. So we cover 874 miles within the city limits. So people do not like to take public transportation. City buses are not used. There's not a great public infrastructure for that. So that's one of the things that impacts our public transportation side.
All right. Bluegrass Airport, located in central Kentucky. Pre-pandemic, we're still a small hub airport. Pre-pandemic, we were just north of 700,000 enplanements a year. As far as ground transportation, in comparison to Terry, we have a significantly smaller ground transportation program. However, it's comprised of 7 individual taxi operators who are permitted with our airport, as well as we have some basic limo and shuttle service through a few of the hotels. And we have basic bus service through the city of Lexington.
All right. Thank you, gents, for that background. So the follow-up is, what are some of your biggest challenges you faced pre-pandemic, and what were some of your strategies to overcome these challenges?
Travis, you want to go first this time?
Sure. I'll go ahead and do that. So pre-pandemic, I think, we were at a pace where similar to a lot of airports, in that we were breaking employment records year after year, and we actually outpaced our master plan forecast. So with that came increased levels that our facility really wasn't designed for. So probably our largest problem, ground transportation wise, was terminal curb congestion. Just getting people in and out of the terminal effectively. The introduction of Uber and Lyft forced us to come up with brand new space for them that didn't exist. So we got very creative in how we did that. And as well, and I'm sure that all the airports on the call can attest to this, another one of our struggles was just simply dealing with the ground transportation operators and personal conflicts, whether they were occurring behind the scenes and reported to the airport, or, unfortunately, if they're occurring in the customers, in front of the customers. We dealt with a lot of significant issues with that. Those were probably our biggest challenges, ground transportation wise.
Yeah, pre-pandemic. Wow, that's it seems like forever ago, but yeah, 2018 and 19, one of the fastest growing airports in the country. We were absolutely full throttle with everything from, we had major curbside congestion, terminal congestion, checkpoint issues. Basically everything was over capacity. We had just completed a master plan update, and we're looking at that activity forecast to try and figure out, was this a permanent thing, and how much do we need to build and when. I actually remember at one point we completely maxed out every single parking garage and lot that we had, and we stood up the emergency operations center to figure out where to start putting people on the fly, basically, which was just crazy for us. But we were, up until the pandemic hit, we were in design for a remote employee parking lot. We were doing a financial feasibility analysis on a third car parking garage and expanding rent-a-car operations into that. We were moving things around almost continuously to try and optimize. We moved city bus pickup locations and just any way to ease some of that curbside congestion on the front of the house.
Great. Follow up for Ray. Given your experience and network within the overall industry, can you give us a bit of perspective of the overall industry and perhaps how it relates to some of the challenges that Travis and Terry faced?
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. And I'm going back to some of my academic leanings here. Can't seem to go anywhere without a slide or two. So if Cody can make me the host, I'd like to share at least just a couple of slides as I kind of explain where we are in the industry. Cody?
Great, I will see if I can make that happen right now.
Okay.
Okay, you should have host permissions.
Let me see if I can get this taken care of here.
Great, did we get course credit?
I should be up here.
Okay.
Can't tell you how pleased I was to hear Tim talk about the three-legged stool, something I've been doing actually for decades now, trying to convince people the aviation industry certainly with respect to passenger transportation, was composed really of three significant parts. Each couldn't exist without the other. Of course, we have to have the airlines, but they have to have people funneled to them and from them, which is where the major segment airports have been for the last 40 or 50 years, and very prominent. But the airports couldn't exist unless ground transportation was there to primarily get people to and from the airport. Of course, they could use their private automobile, but then it'd be parking, which is part of airport ground transportation. I also point out along the way with the three-legged stool that ground transportation, especially parking and especially car rentals, are what I call the revenue generators for the airport, because the amount of expense the airport has to have to collect the revenues from a marginal standpoint is where a lot of it to support other activities on the airport and the terminal and to rebuild and facilities comes from that parking, comes from that car rental revenue that comes in. That's also why for many years I've been calling ground transportation the Rodney Dangerfield leg of this stool. We just get no respect for all that money that's generated by ground transportation. But let me just say the overall industry is composed of really public rail and public bus service, but we don't spend a lot of time with that in AGTA, primarily because a lot of that is for workers, at least employees of the airport, employees of the concessionaires. We're more concerned with the passenger transportation to and from the airport, utilization of the curb, airport parking shuttles, private bus, taxi, limousine shuttles, ride sharing, TNCs, members of AGTA, as well as some courtesy transportation in the way of parking shuttles. We don't really spend a lot of time with car rentals, primarily because they have their own very large and very powerful trade association in the airport ground transportation segment in space, if you will. I might add, going along with this, looking at the industry, AGTA is composed as much of airports today as it is the ground transportation operators. I see many familiar faces among the audience for this particular session. We have 5 members of our board, which are airport members, one being retiring, so we'll be adding another 1 or 2 airport board members to the association. As you can imagine, where we have TNCs, now we have car sharing companies, as well as our traditional operators and airports all coming together at our in-person meetings when we can finally get to them. We ask people to park their guns at the door, and it provides for very interesting meetings, especially breakout groups where people can talk about things off the record, if you will, in terms of how we can better ground transportation. The airport curb is where all the action is. The commonality of all these groups, the landside managers and the ground operators, is that curb, which is the very valuable real estate. Everybody wants to be at the inner curb. We laughingly say that if you've seen one airport curb design and allocation, that you've seen one airport curb design and allocation. There's not a lot of uniformity, if you will. Some airports prefer to put their commercial operators on the inner curb, while others prefer to put their private passenger vehicles on the inner curb because those are local and you can see the politics involved in that. Fee structures, again, you have the same sort of issues going on. Seen one airport, you've seen one airport. Pre-pandemic, I agree with what was said by Travis, and basically our problem was congestion, heavily congested due to TNCs. But also was mentioned, I think the underlying reason for that was the preference for the private automobile. And the other point, as I make, and I'm not advocating TSCs or taxis, they're all our members. TNCs, with their apps and with the use of the internet, made getting ground transportation and paying for ground transportation really easy. The customer convenience of being able to summon a vehicle, expect it to be there within 2 or 3 minutes for you at the curb, being able to pay for it, not having to worry about the kind of taxi service you might have really exposed a change in the industry, which was very, very rapid in just a couple of years. Once TNCs had fought their legal battle, changed laws at the state level, and were sort of forced on airports in some respects, they very rapidly gained a position where they represent 70% of the ground transportation commercial traffic coming off the curb. One last slide here for a minute on airport traffic congestion. This is Los Angeles prior to the pandemic. Literally, it took an hour or more to go around the LAX terminal. It was congested to the point of absolute absurdity. So I'll also end this discussion of issues we had going into pandemic. Really was congestion not being the only problem. There was starting a recognition with the TNCs by representing 70% of the commercial traffic was taking perhaps part of that revenue I talked about earlier and eating into the potential for future revenues. After all, the TNCs, $1 to $5, depending on the airport. Got to change that slide. It's probably $1 to $6 or $7 now. Fees have been going up, but you're getting maybe on the average $3 to $4 per TNC at the airport. If they brought somebody that normally would have parked there, you're losing that parking revenue of $20. In car rentals, it's perhaps even worse. You literally have a $3 to $4 revenue versus somebody that may have rented a car, literally, which basically would represent 10% of that fee, 12% of that fee. If you've got a Conrail facility, you literally are going to get a fee for that in addition to that, which may be $5 or $6 a day. So you literally are losing quite a bit of revenue if someone uses the TNC service or the ride sharing service versus renting an automobile. And starting in the issues just before the pandemic were peer-to-peer car sharing. And I'll talk a little bit about these a little bit later, but peer-to-peer car sharing was starting to really threaten that on-airport car rental revenues, if you will. Well, I'll stop, Jim, and turn it back over to you at this point.
Yeah, great. So Travis, Terry, as the industry, is now in the rebound, mostly with personal and leisure travel, what sorts of trends and challenges are you seeing at your facilities? We'll let Terry go first this time.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, back when Travis and I were talking at the SEC conference, things are changing so rapidly that the things we were talking about 3 months ago are no longer of concern to us. But yeah, so certainly from our perspective, even as we were talking before this call, we're an airport that typically sees 50-50 business leisure. And right now we're obviously seeing very few business and a lot more leisure people. So there's customer service things that go along with that different demographic. But just a few months ago, we were seeing major issues with staffing, and we still see that affecting the ground transportation companies, but also even our concessionaires and airlines. So during the pandemic, a lot of the street side units closed, so everybody was coming to the airport. So we didn't have very many passengers, but we had long lines at the rent-a-car queues, and so everybody was getting funneled into one line because the brands, because they didn't have the staffing, they kind of were sending everybody to one counter. So Avis Budget was one counter, where right now they have 3 open for each different brand. So we saw, from an ops perspective, we saw long lines. We saw a lot of customer service complaints. One that we frequently heard was, it took me longer to get my rent-a-car than it did to get my flight to Jacksonville, which, Atlanta to Jacksonville is less than an hour, and a lot of our traffic comes through Atlanta. But ultimately, yeah, we ended up dealing with a lot of kind of customer service issues, and then car availability became an issue. A lot of rent-a-car, it wasn't uncommon for there not to be one single rent-a-car available in Jacksonville, in the whole city of Jacksonville, whether you were at the airport or off airport. But it seems like over the last month or two, things have kind of normalized in that regard. I'm seeing the cars available sign out in bag claim every day now. We never really had the TNC issue that a lot of airports reported. And I think that's probably because they get pretty good fares out of here, given the distance they've got to travel to get people around. But that's kind of where I would leave it at, is we're really starting to see things normalize back to pre-pandemic as far as ground transportation.
Great. Well, Terry, based on our conversation back in March, I would like to say that the situation has changed in Lexington, like it sounds like in Jacksonville, but unfortunately it hasn't. So similar to Jacksonville, we've had to deal with supply issues, both on the ground transportation side and on the rental car side. Particular on the ground transportation side, both the taxis and the TNCs are just not around. At any given moment, and this actually goes for the city of Lexington as well as the airport site specifically. It's still to the point where you can pull your Uber or Lyft apps up at any given point of the day, and you might see one or two and possibly three cars somewhere in the city. And that's pretty consistent each day. That makes it, a significant challenge. We have a lot of folks standing down, waiting on TNCs, looking for alternates. But on the taxi side of things, we simply just don't have a supply of taxis that want to come here to the airport. Of our 7 agencies that are permitted, none of them are large taxi firms. They're 2, 3, 4, 5 car operators that, run at the select hours that they want to run a day. And it makes it a challenge. So supply has always been, or continues to be, a significant issue here. I will say that as we got into June, things started to get a little bit better. But then as the employments increased with the leisure travel, that those employments outpaced the improvements of the ground transportation side. It's been a significant challenge, and our team with the airport, all of our customer service teams have become very adept at dealing with and managing and mitigating these customer service complaints. With respect specifically to our rental cars, we actually ran into some customer service issues that we got these corrected rather quickly, but we found a trend of passengers arriving on our late night and overnight flights that were going up to ticket counters, and they either weren't open or a reserved car was not available for them. So we dug down into those problems and found that, number one, several of the agencies were not living up to their obligations under their operating permit as far as staffing their counters. But then, even more troubling, we found cases where, for whatever reason, rental car agencies wanted to leave early or didn't want to have to stay for one passenger. And they were actually renting out reserved cars to walk-ups earlier in the day. So a late night passenger would arrive expecting their car, and their car had been mistakenly rented out or deliberately rented out to a walk-up earlier in the day. So we had to respond and really kind of nip that in the bud with the operators, and they're back to being in line with their obligations and their expectations. However, supply is still short all around in all aspects of our ground transportation.
Yeah, and as a frequent traveler of Lexington, I can vouch for all those issues you faced there, Travis. So follow up for Ray. Can you give us a little perspective of what you're seeing across the country?
Let me use again just one slide. Let's see. Cody, am I still?
I do not see the option to give you control, so I assume you have it.
Do I have it now?
I do not see your presentation.
It should be up there. Well, let me suggest that let me just suggest that I'll use it without trying to get this up and running. It doesn't seem to be working that well. Obviously, our certain coming out of the pandemic and ground transportation, our challenges are primarily one big word: labor. We simply can't get the workers, and I think that's the problem with car rental companies also. The problems that we have with labor are getting people that are on furlough from some of our companies literally are making more money being not working than they could be working. And let's face it, TNCs, it's a gig economy. People are working many times part-time. Many of these people that also are in unemployment have a side job. So given the side job and the unemployment benefits that are existing, they're simply not coming back to drive and to participate. The Austrian industry is having the same problem. So ground transportation has it literally in spades. And that goes across the taxi industry, TNCs, shuttles, the whole area. Starting to lessen up somewhat. Hopefully in September, when benefits go away, that situation will improve, and we'll be able to get our industry back to where it was pre-pandemic. I do see some of the airport solutions that were started pre-pandemic, such as taxi type lines for TNC vehicles, removing the TNCs to the parking garage. Those things probably are going to come to the forefront and be practiced where they're applicable at various airports. Typically, it's the TNC, being a large nationwide organization, or in some cases international, will be bringing those solutions as recommendations to the airport. Literally, let me try to look at this. We're concerned, the airport concerns and challenges we have literally are looking at the acceleration of fees for ground transportation. There's a feeling among the ground transportation operators, and I think some airports today, that the private automobile, using the curb, using it the same way as TNCs and taxis, pays literally nothing on a per capita basis coming to and from the airport, and is part of the congestion problem. Following Great Britain and Europe, I think within the next few years, we'll see airports seriously considering charging the private automobile. Literally, some of the concerns that we have with loss of revenue could be substantially changed by even a modest charge for the private automobile, private vehicles being charged at the curb. Some of the other concerns that we have in terms of ground transportation are our more traditional HOV vehicles, high occupancy vehicles, being moved out from the curb in order to be replaced by the TNCs and other cars, literally, as the customer prefers the private use of a car today as opposed to a high occupancy vehicle. That may change as we get further away from the pandemic, but right now, the customer really wants to have that convenience. And after all, at 70% of the curbs, TNCs, at 70% of the traffic, TNCs are a way to basically help remove some of that congestion by giving a preferential spot at the curb. We're starting to see more and more peer-to-peer car sharing, and that's a concern for the other elements of ground transportation, especially car rental companies. But I've been around a long time. I've seen the evolution to shared ride vans. I've seen the evolution to TNCs, and this sort of feels like Airbnb and the TNC development. As more and more consumers become aware of peer-to-peer car sharing, there'll be more demand for it to be available at more and more airports. I'm not taking sides here. I'm just saying I feel this is an evolution that's coming. Let me put a shameless plug in here for our coffee clutch, if you will, called Let's Talk About It. And I'll send this link to everyone on this, I should say to Cody and Tim and people on this list that they want. Next week, Wednesday afternoon, we're having Avail present their car sharing growth and their interactions with, I think they're in 15 airports now, to be a good chance to learn more about Avail. In September, we're doing a two-part program. We're coming back and Turo will be presenting their working with airports and ground transportation issues that they have in working in some of their airport establishments. Finally, let me conclude by saying one of our challenges in ground transportation that used to be far away, distant sort of future, then it was 15 years, 10 years, and now it looks like it's just around the corner, and that's autonomous vehicles. Most airport landside people, especially large airports, are saying, we expect these vehicles to be here, but we don't think we can integrate them with everything else that's going on at the curb. We're going to have a special area for autonomous vehicles that only are allowed into that area so that we can control them once they're on the airport property and not try to commingle them, because we think that would be too much of a problem. So those are the challenges as we see them in ground transportation. So let me turn it back over to Tim. Sorry, I couldn't get the issues to work here.
Oh, no worries, Ray. So quickly, last question for you guys before we open it up to the group. Using the pandemic as almost an opportunity to adjust. Travis, Terry, are you guys doing anything creative to help, build things back better than they were previously?
I'll go ahead and kick that one off. So yes, we are in Lexington. We're taking kind of a short-term and long-term approach to it, whether a tactical and strategic. So in the short term and the tactical side, we actually reached out to our TNCs and said, hey, is there anything that we can do to incentivize drivers to either come back or come specifically to the airport? We even floated the idea of the opportunity to create artificial surge areas over the airport. The TNCs really weren't interested in entertaining that, and we really didn't have any useful discussions with them. On the taxi side of the house, we actually pulled all of our taxi operators in and we just asked them straight up, what could we do as a facility to incentivize your drivers and your cars to come back to the airport? And we actually put the ball in their court. They're still due to report back to us on that, but we're thinking things as simple as gas cards, food cards, something to get drivers back here. We just need cars and drivers. From a long-term perspective, up until this point, we've had a rather loose ground transportation program that was mostly focused at taxis. So what we're in the process of doing is crafting a more robust ground transportation program that accounts for most, if not all, of the ground transportation that operates here, both in the form of rules and regs and revenue sources. But another thing that we're considering as well, we've kicked around this idea for years and years and years, but this might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, is that we are highly considering a sole source taxi operation here, where we'd like to go into agreement with two operators that we feel confident in, and we think that it'll provide us a better opportunity to move forward while implementing something we've always talked about, but just haven't really found a compelling reason to pull the trigger. So that's what we're thinking in the short and long term moving forward with ground transportation.
All right, thanks, Travis. So, yeah, for Jack's perspective, one of the gifts the pandemic gave us was time, and so during the pre-pandemic, we were just full throttle, and we didn't have time to think. We had to add capacity, solve problems day to day, kind of almost knee jerk just to survive. So the pandemic gave us a little bit of a breather, time to really look at things, make sure we're optimizing the operation. During the pandemic, we kind of used some differential pricing to move customers around to different lots to kind of maximize, shuttles and things like that. And overall, we're just a much leaner organization now than we were, because through voluntary separation, we cut a pretty good section of our workforce. So we've got to be, as nimble as possible right now. But the good thing is now we kind of have a playbook. We know if there's a significant downturn for whatever reason, if it's the Delta variant or whatever, we kind of know, we have a timeline. We know what the impact of revenue is going to be, and we know what kind of levers we can pull. But we did take the pandemic as an opportunity to catch up on a lot of things that would have been very difficult otherwise from a maintenance perspective. Structural repairs to the parking garages and rent-a-car areas, and simple things like painting lines that that are a challenge when your lot is full every single day. The big question is, that one of the things that we're continuously talking about is, when do we kind of transition from cash conservation back to kind of normal and confident planning? What does the employment horizon look like? Is this going to be a U-shaped recovery, or is it going to be a W now with the Delta variant? So just kind of remaining flexible. The good thing is with the summer employments and the schedules the airlines have provided out into the fall, we're kind of starting to make that transition now into more of an ops normal. We've restarted most of our capital program expansion wise. We're getting ready to restart our concourse expansion. As part of that, and in tandem to make sure that the landside congestion is addressed, we are kicking off a landside roadway optimization study, which will kick off this fall, trying to really time things so that when we surge back up even over pre-pandemic numbers, that we are prepared this time to handle them. So kind of making the best use of that gift of time the pandemic gave us.
Great. Thanks, Terry. Ray, any thoughts or suggestions quickly before we open it up to all questions from anyone?
Basically, I'd like to encourage Travis in his attempt to go to we don't want to say a closed system, because any taxi company typically can be prearranged and come and pick up like any car service when you have a single concessionaire. But airports in the past, and are now looking to the future, that have a single concessionaire wouldn't want to give it up. You can get bad contractors, you can have a bad season, but for the most part, by having high standards for your concessionaire, literally, you're going to be able to have, I would say, a successful situation there, without a doubt. I'd like maybe to just make one comment about how the internet and apps have changed a lot of industries, and especially in terms of ground transportation. I mentioned earlier where TNCs have made it so convenient, but the taxi industry, for example, is playing catch up. But they themselves now have developed in various parts of the country apps where you know exactly what your price is going to be before you get in that cab. You like the convenience of being able to pay. You can do it through your app. So many of the things of the conveniences of the TNCs are now being picked up by the taxi industry. So airports should be looking at those and saying, look, we want that for our customers. We want to have it in our ground transportation taxi service. And the way to do that probably is a single concessionaire and requesting those sorts of things. The other implications for apps and internet are off-airport parking concerns, prearranged ground transportation parking, prepayment. All those things are being done now with the use of an app, and we can expect more of that. So I guess in your ground transportation planning and programming, somebody should be asking the question, what's the latest technology that we have out there? We have the capability now at low expense to be able to have continuous cameras watching all our shuttle drivers, continuously being able to time them, to keep them on schedule, to give that kind of feedback, to show that the vehicles are being cleaned and other things that simply weren't there pre-pandemic. So look to some of our vendors that are bringing some of this technology to you and say, our airport might be a medium-sized airport, maybe a smaller one, but we can offer our customers the same things. Actually, in my career and looking at airports in general, it's typically the medium or smaller airport closer to your customer. After all, your customers are your neighbors, are more likely to have higher standards and better service in many cases than the very large airports that have to contend with the kind of traffic congestion we saw at LAX. Now I get all my large airport folks upset with me, but I'm used to it. So, I think it's a great time for ground transportation. I think you're going to see a charging of the private automobile and some of the evolution of who's paying for the airport curve in the relatively near future. It'll be a challenge, but I think it'll be a better time, especially for the airline traveling public. So that's my comment.
All right. Well, thank you. And I'm glad you brought up the pre-booked parking systems. That's one of the first questions we have in the chat there for Travis and Terry. Have either of you looked into? Yes, sir.
Tim, just want to butt in here for a quick second. We are getting near the end of our allotted 45 minutes. However, our panelists have indicated that they are available to keep the conversation going. So for those of you that are able to hang around a little bit longer, we of course encourage that. But for those who have to hop off, we want to thank you for joining us today. And so please continue, Tim.
Yeah, all right, no problem. Travis, Terry, have either of you looked into the pre-book parking systems or as another mechanism to relieve congestion at the curb and incentivize passengers to use on-site parking facilities?
Travis, go ahead.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead first because ours is very simple in that, yes, we have looked into it and understand the technology. Unfortunately, currently, we don't have the infrastructure to implement it effectively. However, our parking operator is installing technology that will give us that ability. And once it is installed, we're certainly going to check into it.
Yeah, so I guess pre-pandemic, we were looking at everything, every different sort of technology or gizmo out there to try and optimize the operation. It doesn't really help curbside congestion for our setup because the parking folks are kind of diverted off, and we never really have a line backing up from entering the parking garage or the parking lots. Generally speaking, the congestion is with the rent-a-cars and the TNCs and the regular traffic coming in. But we did upgrade our parking system right there, I guess around 2018-19 time, where it has the LPR, the latest technology, kind of all the the preferred passenger where they can have an AV card where they don't have to wait for a ticket. So I guess to answer the question, in some regards, yes, in some regards, no.
Gotcha. Opening it up to the group. Any other questions for our panel? You can either type them in the chat or just speak up.
Tim, let me add one comment about parking. The parking industry for airport, the off-airport or near-airport parking, depending on how they want to be called, there's a lot of consolidation that's gone on in that marketplace. You have large operators, SP Plus, you have spot parking. We have a number of those that are part of AGTA, and they can afford the latest and newest and greatest technology because they look at that a way as to provide competition, if you will. I think it's a healthy competition among the airports, both on airport and off airport. The winner really is the parking individual, the traveling public. You also have the development of brokerage in the airport parking industry, where brokers will set up small lots and being able to provide transfers back and forth to the airport. So you're going to see perhaps more of that brokerage using internet and apps for prearranged parking. I would think you're going to see much more of it. one of the things I've found out in running these sessions, by the way, guys, this is not, you sort of set them up and you think it's going to be like one of your breakouts at an annual meeting or a SEC AAAE meeting. And people are rather reluctant to raise their hand if they're going to be noticed, and it's also being recorded. So don't be surprised if we don't get a lot of questions. I'm continually amazed at that. Nobody is shy when they're at a meeting. Maybe it's the fact they have a little liquid assistance along the way, but we just don't get the kind of questions in these sessions that you think you might be getting.
Well, we do have another question in the chat for the group. Any thoughts around dynamic pricing and how that system can help alleviate pressures of close-in parking during non-peak times?
Sure. So I'll go ahead and defer to my first response is that, we currently don't have a very good infrastructure to be able to implement that in Lexington. However, similar to Terry, we've investigated, a whole significant amount of things leading up to 2019 and the pandemic. I failed to mention that we were in a similar situation where we were running out of parking. We literally had to create grass and gravel lots to accommodate folks. But during the pandemic, we took it as an opportunity to build more parking. So we netted what we think is enough spots. What we're seeing right now is more than enough spots. However, as well, we have a very basic passenger parking infrastructure here just with our lots. However, things like dynamic pricing and things like the pre-book, they're always on our radar, and we're always getting updated as we reach different milestones in our organization.
Yep, and I'll just echo exactly what Travis said. We were looking at systems, but we do not currently have the infrastructure to do the dynamic pricing. That was one of the benefits we were looking at with some of those systems. But in the end, we were just flat out of capacity. Even in our remote economy lots, even if we would try to push people to those were full. What was happening is every single day, the customer's first preference would usually fill up, and then the next second, and so they would end up going whatever was open at that time, the only option. And so that may have been a passenger that wanted to park in the $5 a day economy lot that ended up parking in the $23 hourly garage, simply because that was the only option. So yeah, it's dynamic pricing is good if you've got places you can push them to, but with the situation we were looking at, we didn't have a lot of options.
I have a question for Terry. Jacksonville International is sort of a typical a commercial service airport for the Southeast chapter. You're serving maybe a mid-sized market. You're a little bit far from the downtown core, and you're in a city without a robust public transportation system. You recently had a test case of the return to business travel with the FAC annual conference that you hosted in downtown. And I believe about a quarter of the attendees responded that they came by air travel. Can you talk about what the preferred method of getting to the conference was from the airport for those travelers, if you had any anecdotal evidence, and if that changed from maybe in the past?
Yeah, I don't think that's really changed. All the options are available now, just like they were pre-pandemic, because we're not seeing those operational issues we were. When I was actually just looking earlier today at the kind of the distribution of taxis, TNCs, rent-a-cars, kind of how people are getting around, and that's really kind of normalized. That's kind of back to May 2019 type numbers. So I think that anecdotally, people are going back to doing the same things they were doing before. I noticed, obviously during the pandemic, things were all over the place. People didn't want to take TNCs, taxis, rent-a-cars. Things were shifting around based on availability. But I think now things are really sort of normalizing. I think the business travelers kind of going back to what they're used to, or at least a few that we're seeing come through.
Yeah, Cody, I might add that we're starting to see the TNCs are now public companies and their boards, and I've sat on some of the public company boards, there's pressure for them to be profitable. And they've made promises to their stockholders that literally they will be profitable by the fourth quarter of this year. So that means fares are going to go up. The threat of unionization is there as laws are being changed at the federal level. So you're going to see actually TNCs perhaps at some airports and in some cities like New York having higher rates than taxi cabs. With surge pricing, that gets to be significant. So it'll be interesting to see in this dynamic if taxi cabs can improve their level of service, provide some of the same amenities, and compete with TNCs for that 70% of the market which they now enjoy at airports. Now I have TNCs mad at me. So with an association that has all these different memberships, it's hard not to be tramping on a few toes while you're trying to promote others.
Sure. Another question here in the chat. Any thoughts on taking over management of your parking facilities? A non-traditional approach, but one that is gaining momentum at airports across the country. Thoughts for the panel?
We've discussed it in Lexington. It kind of aligns with our philosophy of how to run this facility. However, at this time, we haven't found enough compelling reason to do it. But it's certainly a discussion point every time we, talk about ground transportation.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we haven't entertained that discussion about going away from a parking management company. There's some benefits to that from an insurance perspective, but also from a labor perspective. With collective bargaining, there's no way we could provide that service with shuttle drivers and stuff at the same cost that they do. And generally speaking, we're very happy with them. They do a good job. They've been very flexible throughout the pandemic. So I don't believe that's on the radar for us.
We do not see a trend towards airports taking over their parking management. And I say that, SP Plus, by the way, is a big member of AGTA. So I'm sort of honor bound to say, hey, let professionals do that job. And, let professionals do what they do well, and that is manage, especially a very labor-oriented type of operation. And SP Plus can bring the latest in parking technology and dynamic pricing to the airports, as well as the other parking management firms that are part of our association.
Gotcha. So I think that's all the questions we have in the chat. Any others from anyone?
Yeah, I've got a question for Ray. So something that I heard at FAC from another peer airport, and they suggested that one of the reasons there's a shortage of TNC drivers is because it's more lucrative for those drivers to run food through Instacart or Uber Eats, etc. Is there any truth to that?
We just had Uber and Lyft both as panelist members of our recent coffee clutch, if you will. And they indicated pretty much that's the case, that drivers can make more money. They turn to the food delivery, can make more money delivering food because it's constant work as opposed to intermittently picking up passengers. They also literally have said that the problem, though, is getting drivers back. And they don't expect that to change until literally, I'm not trying to be political, but until the situation is that drivers can make more money driving than they can being on unemployment. I mean, I don't blame the drivers. There are people like you and I. If we could make the same amount, well, I never said that, but I was an academic. People would still do their job, but they weren't being paid. But most of us, if we could make as much money being with our families, being at home, doing our hobbies. We're going to continue to do that until we're presented with other activities, other options. So work is intrinsic in of itself, but after all, driving is not the most glamorous job. So you're right. It is a labor issue. That's why I had that first.
Thank you, Ray.
All right. Any questions from anyone else?
This is Dan Barton from Intervestus. I have a quick question. Ray mentioned airport access fees briefly a couple of minutes ago. And as an airport consultant, we've heard a few airports reach out to us about airport access fees. I was wondering if Travis or Terry, your airports have talked about it. And I see a bunch of other airports on also if any airports in the Southeast are talking about airport access fees.
To my knowledge, us in Lexington, we haven't discussed it.
We didn't discuss it until Ray mentioned it. Any way we can make money is a good idea, but no, seriously, we're not considering it. I think culturally, it's not really accepted in the U.S. I know that potentially other countries they do that, but I think until there's some sort of reason that would force everybody to consider that, maybe that's autonomous vehicles. I don't know. But we'd have to have a really good reason, I think, to persuade the public that this is a good thing. I mean, at the end of the day, we're here to serve the public. And if we start charging them just to come to the airport, there's going to be obviously a pretty loud outcry. So until such time that we need to take that on, I don't see that happening.
To be honest with you, Dan, I don't see it happening at medium and smaller airports. I do see it being considered by airports that have come back and still have tremendous traffic problems. They are the ones that would probably be the first ones to consider it. And also in states where you have toll roads, Florida being a primary example, where you have toll roads where toll tags and toll bridges and tolls for access are somewhat commonplace in the customer setting. But once a major airport or two starts to charge the private automobile, and you can see the revenue that can be generated even with a modest 50 cents or $1 for access, you may find other airports taking a look at it. So there's a future activity for you, Dan, but it may take a while to develop.
That's right. Thank you for your responses.
Anybody else? All righty. Well, hey, I want to thank all of our guests for joining us today, and a special thank you to Travis, Terry, and Ray for your time and your thoughts to the panel today. Cody, I want to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, and thank you, Tim, for putting this all together. I do want to mention that if you are a corporate committee member of the Southeast Chapter AAAE, you have an opportunity to sponsor and put up a panel for a future coffee conversation for, I think, a very nominal fee. And that fee does go towards supporting the mission of SEC AAAE. So it's a good cause as well. So if you are interested, please reach out to me or any other contacts of leadership of the Southeast Chapter. John Kerrigan is the chair of our corporate committee. So if you know him, you can reach out to him as well. So thanks again to our panelists and for our attendees, and we will see you at next month's event. Have a good time until then. Bye-bye.